Welcome to the Writer's Life lecture series. Today we're very excited to talk about novel writing with our guest Susanna Daniel and my co-host Olivia Peterson. First, I want to just say a few things what Writer's Life lecture series is. 4 times throughout the semester here at Madison College, we have professional writers come in to talk about their skills in various formats of writing. Could be screenwriting, could be journalism, could be copywriting, poetry. We've even had animation writing and things like that. So today we're focused on novel writing. And first I want to say thank you very much, Olivia.
You're welcome.
For, I sort of I didn't know if I forced you, but I sprung this on Olivia at the last moment to be co-host, and I really appreciate it.
I just hope I get extra credit.
Actually, you do.
Okay, good.
But not more extra credit than the others in the audience, even though you're doing 10 times as much work.
Okay.
And then, of course, we have Susanna Daniel. So, hi. Thank you, Susanna.
Sure.
Susanna was, at one point, a long time ago, an adjunct creative writing instructor. That was, I believe, before your first novel, was it?
Yep. Well before my first novel. That was during the torturous process of writing my first novel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about today. And as you know, we have a PowerPoint and we're going to go through that. We have different things that we would like to get to in about 60 minutes. Okay. The final thing before we talk is I'd like to introduce Todd. Todd, you don't have to come out here. Todd Bowie is the audio production, video production instructor who is in charge of a class. There you are. That's Todd, who's in charge. And there he goes. Who's in charge of a class, event production. And they're doing the videography as well as the post-production of the editing. And they're going to upload it to YouTube later. So we're going to have, not only do we have an audience here at the Truax Theater Lab of probably 20, 25 students, but also we'll have an audience out there in the world of YouTube. They could be all over the place. Could be Wanakee, could be Stoughton, but I saw the analytics from a previous Writer's Life, and we did have one in the state of Alaska. So that was very cool. Anyway, so what I'd like to do is to thank everybody who came here and those people who are tapping in later on video. Thank you for doing that. The crowd, the audience, I have given everybody note cards. And if you are interested in developing your own ideas for a novel, Susanna is going to help. And so before we get to your life history and your writing process and what you do and how you do it regarding novels, I'm going to ask if you can start off with an instruction of what these note cards, how they can get going on it over the course of the next hour. You mentioned 3 things you would like them to do.
Yeah. So I teach novel writing. It's one of the things that I do for paid work. And what I tell people is that I feel really strongly that you do not have to have the entire story written in your head. You don't even have to have the first plot beat written in your head. If you are an outliner, great. If you're not, I ask for you to have 3 major things in your mind before you start. The 3 things are point of view. And by point of view, I don't just mean will it be first person or third or rotating third or whatever you decide, omniscient, but also how closely you're going to be inside your point of view's head. So that's called narrative distance. So point of view is a combination of the choice you make about which point of view you use and the choice you make about narrative distance. The second thing is the clock. And this is hugely helpful, especially if you're writing your first or second or third novel. And that's how long the whole story will span. So my first book spanned 3 decades. I had no idea that that was true when I first started writing it. And that became a long, arduous process of figuring it out. So I wish I had just told myself that from the beginning. And then the other is tense. And I know people have their, preferences, about present tense. I have things to say about them, but I would say any tense you choose is great and you can change it later, but it's really wonderful if you can start with that choice made.
Cool. Okay. So point of view, the clock or the time span of the story, and then what tense you would like. Okay, so in the crowd, if you're interested to participate, think about it throughout the rest of this period. If you were going to design your own novel, how close would you be to the narrator or the narration? Would it be extremely close, first person, or more distant? And then also, what would be the length of time? Could it be 3 days the story evolves, or could it be 3 decades, like you mentioned? And then the third one, can you elaborate on that one more time?
Tense.
Tense. Okay, basically first, past. Is it going to be happening as we speak, or is it going to be from history?
Right.
Good. All right. So, Sydney, do you want to hit the PowerPoint with one slide? And could you read that for me?
I fell in love with Susanna Daniel's characters, Dennis and Francis. The dialogue, the pacing, and the tenderness between this married couple is so authentic and true, but it is the setting of Florida, and especially the place that is Stiltsville, that literally elevates the story to magic.
Well, that's pretty powerful. So this is the first novel, Stiltsville, right?
Yeah. Okay,
we're going to go through a couple of other quotes, and then we're going to get to your books, your novels. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So let's, Sydney, next slide.
Susanna Daniels brings an uncommon intimacy to her characters' lives, and also to the landscape where those lives unfold. A cartographer not only of the shore and the ocean, but the passions, bruises, joys, and insufficiencies of the human heart.
Cool. Thank you very much, Olivia. Next slide, Sydney.
Oh boy. Sea Creatures is perfect for summer reading, a more literary offering than your usual beach fare. Author Susanna Daniel crafts beautiful, dreamy descriptions of ocean life that threaten to lull readers into a sense of complacency.
Nice. Okay. One more slide. I think we have one more quote. Oh, no, we go right. No, we don't. We go right to the novel. Okay. Here we are with Stiltsville. Let's have a summary of it.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about it. Okay.
Stiltsville by Susanna Daniels is a novel set in Miami spanning from the late 1960s to the 1990s. It follows the life of Frances Ellerby, who, during a visit to a unique community of houses built on stilts in Biscayne Bay, meets Dennis Duval. Their relationship quickly blossoms into a marriage, and the novel explores their life together over 3 decades. Throughout the story, Francis and Dennis navigate various challenges, including career struggles, raising their daughter Margot, and dealing with significant historical events like the Miami riots and Hurricane Andrew. The novel beautifully captures the essence of Miami during this period, highlighting themes of love, family, friendship, and resilience.
Okay, so let's stop right there. So this is set in, I got the book recently, and I'm making my way through it. It's very poetic is the way you've written it. It's a beautiful writing style, extremely descriptive. So obviously you know the area and you know the boats. I was impressed because I love to sail.
You're a sailor.
And,
right?
and you know parts of the boats and things like that. So can you describe how this idea of the story came to you and when it came to you?
Sure. So Stiltsville is a place in Biscayne Bay. It takes about 30 minutes to take a boat out to this collection of stilt houses. And I grew up going there every other weekend because my grandfather built one of them. Now there are only 7. Back then there were 14. And pretty much everybody I knew somebody who owned a house at Stiltsville or co-owned. So a lot of people spent a lot of time out there. Miami was a really different city then. And it was the place where my father grew up, my grandfather, my grandmother, like they had lived there, when it was like mostly farmsteads. And then I was growing up in the 80s when it was mostly like Cocaine Cowboys and Miami Vice and all of that stuff. So it was a really exciting place to grow up, especially because I got to spend time at this really special location. Now I have 2 children, and there's no scenario in which I could take my children away from our home and they would have no access to television, or cell phones didn't exist, or any, we would like listen to the game on the radio, and like listen to the weather every once in a while to make sure we didn't need to head home. So I always knew that I really wanted to write about this place that I felt bored by as a teenager, of course, because I'm like, I want to go to Jennifer's party and not to spend the whole weekend with my family at Stiltsville reading in the hammock is what I did all weekend. But I knew that other people would really find this an exciting place to kind of nestle into.
I want to stop you.
Oh, she's stopping me.
So this setting, the houses are on stilts. The stilts are about 7 feet above the ocean water or so, right? And extremely fragile with the hurricanes coming. And so you were basically...
You can see one right there.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So you basically went there growing up on vacations, right?
Well, we just went there every other weekend.
Wow.
Just weekend home, weekend there. It was like having a second house. We never had like a real second house, but
wow.
And my family did not travel. We didn't have like a lot of extra time or money, but we did Stiltsville.
Wow. So you would go there and you were literally, the ocean would be underneath you as you went to sleep.
Yep, we slept there. There were 2 bedrooms and plenty of mattresses, but we would, or beds, but we would haul the mattresses onto the big porch and sleep there.
And there was a neighborhood of other houses?
There were 13 others. You could, when the tide was really low, you could walk to a couple of the houses, but otherwise you couldn't. And if you got over there, the tide might have gone up and then you'd need to get a ride back. It was great. I mean, there was an eel that lived beneath our dock that we, just knew how to avoid. I mean, we got lobsters every once in a while, learned how to snorkel. We jumped off the boat. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. But if you wanted to go to the house next to you, unless it was low tide, you have to take a boat.
You'd have to take a boat. And this is relevant, I promise. But the guy who was our closest neighbor had no boat. And he would have, he was this aging hippie dude, and he would have colleagues bring him food and women, and then they would have naked parties all weekend, and my parents would watch them, and I'd be like, what are you looking at? And they'd be like, nothing. So there, it was like a funny community, like a weird little community.
So they had little binoculars there.
They would stand and watch him have his parties. I'm sure they were a little jealous.
That's wild.
But I wrote about him in my second book.
Okay, let's get to Sea Creatures in a little bit. Let's go back to how did... so obviously you have a sense of this is Susanna's upbringing, and she's bringing this to her world of writing. How did it come about? I'm just curious, how does the idea come about? Do you you couldn't sleep one night and you came up with the idea? Or for us who have not written a novel, how do these things happen?
I'm going to confess that my best novel ideas, I've written 4 novels, and 3 out of 4 of them have been somebody else's idea. So in grad school, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and we had to, I think we had to submit 6 stories a year. And I wrote this story. It was called We Are Cartographers, and it was about the mom in this book and her kid who is experimenting. Her 15-year-old child is experimenting by having sort of illicit relations with her best friend, another girl. And it's about the mom's perspective and kind of how she's handling this over the weekend and her tensions with her husband. I don't know why I thought that I could write things that had no plot, but I used to think that. And so that's why it sounds like it has no plot. It kind of doesn't. So I wrote this story, and it was one of these things called a magic story where it got placed in an anthology. It got me a fellowship. It got me ranked number 1 in my MFA class. This is a million years ago, so I'm not bragging. It's kind of like, what have I done lately? And then I sat down with an agent who really loved the story, and she was like, I think you should write a book about these characters. And I was like, no, I think I'm done with these characters. And then I wrote a book about these characters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. Let's roll through. Sydney, next slide. And if you want to read, Olivia,
Yeah.
the Sea Creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Sea Creatures by Susanna Daniel is a compelling novel that delves into the complexities of family, marriage, and personal growth. The story follows Georgia Quillen, who returns to her hometown of Miami with her husband, Graham, and their son, Frankie. They are seeking a fresh start after facing professional and personal setbacks in Illinois. Georgia's husband, Graham, struggles with a sleep disorder that cost him his job, and their son, Frankie, has stopped speaking. They move into a houseboat provided by Georgia's father and stepmother. Graham takes a job studying extreme weather, which often keeps him away from home. Georgia finds a work with an assistant to an artist living in an isolated community of Stiltsville. This new environment brings unexpected changes, especially for Frankie, who begins to open up. However, as Graham's job takes him away for longer periods, Georgia is faced to confront the fractures in her marriage and the challenges of raising a child with selective mutism. The novel reaches a climax as a hurricane threatens South Florida, forcing Georgia to make difficult decisions to protect her son and herself. Sea Creatures is a poignant exploration of high stakes of a marriage and parenthood and the journey of a woman coming into her own.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to read in just a little bit, but I think hurricanes is an important thing to talk about, particularly what's happening in the news.
More bearing down right now.
Yeah. So you've experienced hurricanes.
Yeah, but when I was a kid, this is like before everybody's time here, they were like these sort of gentle passing things. Like we would do dumb things like tape up our windows and like gather bottled water or whatever, like fill the cars with gas, but we didn't really do much. And they would almost always pass us unscathed until 93 when Andrew hit. And that was the first one in my lifetime that was a seriously destructive storm.
Right. So in Stiltsville, there's a hurricane, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
And now hurricane is a big part of the plot of Sea Creatures.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how your use of the external environment for the development of your plot in Sea Creatures?
So here's the thing. As writers, we all have like natural strengths and sort of natural not strengths. Ideally, you would have a climax that comes from the turmoil and the trouble that you've created between your characters. But if you don't, and you set it in South Florida, you might decide to use a hurricane instead. So what I've done is I've created in Sea Creatures, which has a lot more plot than Stiltsville and a lot less than my other two novels. I've created like this sort of explosive situation between the main character and her husband, who's a parasomniac, where they're sort of uncovering some secrets that they hadn't known before. And as they're doing that, this hurricane hits and kind of sends the marriage asunder, as it were.
Okay. All right. Great. So would you like to read from Sea
Sure.
Creatures?
Yeah, I'm just going to read
Just
a paragraph.
a small part. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of short readings. I'm going to read about jellyfish. Jellyfish season was early that year. I was in the office and Charlie and Frankie were sitting in the rocking chairs in the porch, taking turns with a pair of binoculars. Through the window, I heard Charlie say, "What is it?" When I looked out, I saw Frankie make the sign we'd learned, one hand against the other, pulling away and moving back again. "What's that?" Charlie said. I blurted, "Jellyfish." "They're early," said Charlie when I came out onto the porch. I couldn't see them at first, but after a moment they appeared. A moment after they appeared, the water was thick with them. They came in a windsock pattern, a leviathan in aggregate, dense at the start before petering out. Charlie told us this was called a bloom, and it happened every summer, usually not until August. It was only mid-July, but there had been a rash of small storms in the Atlantic, and they'd washed in prematurely. We went down the dock to watch them. These were moon jellies, the umbrellas cloudy along the rims and a bud of pink at the heart. Before the first one crossed in front of the dock, there was a flurry in my peripheral vision, and I turned to see Charlie drop his shirt and dive into the water. Frankie looked up at me, and I gripped his shoulders. Charlie surfaced, facing the advancing battalion. I called, "What are you doing?" "Swimming," he said.
Okay. Thank you. So as I was reading Stiltsville, I've noticed you're extremely descriptive the way you build your story with description. It seems, at least the way I saw it at the beginning of Stillsville. So how many times does it take you to take that passage to the point where you have read it just now? Meaning, how many drafts do you have to go through in the writing process to elevate your description? Does it happen mostly on first draft, or do you have to come back to it again and again on rewrites?
I think mostly in rewrite and revision, I cut down my description because I tend to be a heavy. It's not description. It's describing things in the detail that is like reality, which is, it's like HD is how I like to like describe what's happening with my characters. And then in my second, third, fifth, 19th time through, I'm actually kind of pulling some of that out. So it's not asking quite so much of the reader.
Gotcha. So let's say like with an artist with a block of wood, trying to sculpt a block of wood, you're taking away the wood.
You are taking away so much. There are underwriters and there are overwriters. Most of us are overwriters. Most of us are going to end up with 100,000 word draft that turns into a 75,000 word draft. And, cutting is shaping. That's what I always tell people. Say, I cut 500 words today. And I said, good. Good. And Richard Russo says it's 17 drafts of every novel. And I'm like, that's conservative, but yeah. And I like the sculptural comparison, but what I say is that it's you write sedimentary, like writing a sedimentary. So you're kind of writing this one big block of wood or whatever, and then you're going through and making sure that each of your characters is distinct from each other, going through and making sure that their dialogue is, so this is what we would call micro revisions, right? You're going through every draft looking for something to improve. Right. And that's how you get to 17.
Do you write the whole novel as one, or you do I know of a novelist who just he breaks it down into like acts, like 3 acts.
3 acts.
Like screenwriting. And he'll write the first act. And if he's not happy with the first, that would be about 80 pages. If he's not happy, he won't go on. So, or do you go through the whole thing, even if you feel the first 80 pages are not really what you think worked well? Do you keep going through?
Does he stop writing the novel entirely?
Yeah.
So he gives it 50 to 80 pages to decide whether or not he wants to go for it. I think that's great. I mean, you have a couple ideas, you want to chase after one for a while and choose, but I do not go back and revise pages if I am not finished with the novel, and I do continue.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's really, really vital to the writing process. Now, somebody like Kevin Brockmeyer was up here. I know for a fact that he writes every sentence, rewrites every sentence as he goes along, and when he's done with the last sentence, he is done with the novel. Wow. That is a very rare and difficult way to write a novel. You have to have a lot of faith in yourself.
Yeah, and it's also a lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure.
Yeah. Right. Okay, thanks. Sydney, next slide, please. All right. So, Olivia, do you see the description there of, this is the biography of
I see.
Amy Gannon. Okay, this is a nonfiction.
Okay. Amy, a biography on Amy Gannon by Susanna Daniel, is a heartfelt and detailed account of the life of Amy Gannon, an activist, entrepreneur, and beloved community figure. The biography was inspired by the tragic accident on December 26, 2019, when Amy and her 13-year-old daughter Jocelyn were killed in a helicopter crash on the Napali coast in Hawaii. The book was initiated by Amy's husband, Mike, who wanted to preserve her legacy for her son, Aaron. Over a year and a half, Susanna Daniel conducted interviews with more than 45 of Amy's friends, family members, and colleagues. These interviews paint a vivid picture of Amy's journey from a modest upbringing in Greenville, Ohio, to her impactful career focused on social justice and empowering women. Amy's life was marked by her fierce loyalty, tireless commitment to ending inequity, and deep love for her family. The biography captures her passion, wit, and warmth, ensuring that her legacy continues to inspire those who knew her and those who learn about her through this book.
Thank you very much. So this I know about because my daughter, Dakota, was friends with Jocelyn, who was in the helicopter tragedy of 2019. Jocelyn was 13, I believe.
Yep.
And it was very tragic. In the middle school where my daughter went, everybody knew Jocelyn. And I remember specifically, we were concerned about, our daughter's emotional welfare because of the passing away of Jocelyn because of that tragic accident. My question is, did you know Amy Gannon, and how did you get involved with doing nonfiction?
I didn't know Amy Gannon. I wish I had. I frankly think she would have liked me and I would have liked her a lot.
Yeah.
But I didn't get to know her until after she was dead. I own a writing studio called the Madison Writer Studio. I started it in 2013 with the author Michelle Wildchen. Right after publishing my second book and having my second kid, I said, let's do this, because every city that I knew about, there's the Loft in Minneapolis. There's Boston has a couple of, the Grub Street in Boston, 2nd Street in Brooklyn. And I said, we don't have a private writing workshop that's really high quality and, takes people seriously. So we started that in 2013. And then Mike Gannon got in touch with me through that. And I remember I was wrestling with my coffee maker when he called, and I was feeling really bad about my life because I couldn't have a cup of coffee. And then he called and was like, I have this project. Would you be interested in it? And I was like, yeah. I mean, I had no idea how to do it or how to approach it. I had no idea what to charge. I mean, I just was like totally out of my depth, but I was also like, I'm the one to do this. I want to do this. And then I met this guy in real life, and he brought me all of these journals, Amy's, private journals from childhood and in college and graduate school. And he brought me pictures and letters, and I just started getting to know her. And I said, oh, I should be done with this in 4 months. It took 18. It was extremely meaningful and really ruled my life for a long time. I just am so grateful that I got to do it.
So you did 45 interviews?
I interviewed Amy's homecoming date, as well as her mom. I interviewed her childhood best friends. I talked to her childhood best friends about the fight they had when they were in 5th grade. Everything. And then of course, Mike, her husband.
Why did you have to go to such lengths for interviewing? That's quite a lot.
It was a lot, yeah.
It's not the biggest biography. It's like 300 pages, maybe.
Yeah, not even, I don't think. Well, he wanted it to be. It's what it originally was going to be is a gift for his son, who lived. He and his son were on the shore, and Jocelyn and Amy were in the helicopter. So he wanted his son to have something that was as exhaustive a biography of her life as possible. And you don't talk to your kids about your 5th grade best friend or your 10th grade homecoming date. You just don't. My kids have never asked me one thing about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But eventually, they might want to know. So that's the kind of thing that we got in there.
Right.
And then there was stuff that Mike didn't know, because you never know your spouse as well as, you would like to. And there were, things that her friends wanted to tell me about parts of her life that he didn't see, her professional life and stuff outside of the house. And that goes in there too. Yeah.
So how do you compare writing nonfiction to the novel writing that you spend most of your career doing? What's the comparison of that?
If I had to do this again, I feel like it would be a lot more straightforward. And writing a novel, as much support as you get, as much, mechanics, craft skills as you have, it's still a winding road. Whereas writing something like a biography can really be, shaped and structured in such a way that you are feeding an outline. Mm-hmm. That is not how I did it, again, because I'm a mess. But if I were to do it again, that's how it would be.
Mhm.
Whereas novel writing it's just a huge act of faith.
You know, I try my own fiction. I'm a journalist by my education. I teach journalism here and film. So, but I do get into fiction, and I feel like it's dancing on air. You know, it's like compared to journalism, because with journalism, you go out and do your interviews and 45, whatever, then you've got your big piles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so comforting to know, oh yes, I think I have that anecdote there, or I have that description there. And
Comforting
there's the
is a great
story
word, yeah.
right there on the table.
Yeah.
But with fiction, I don't know what the story is.
Yeah.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah, it's really scary. That's, again, the faith. You faith in your story, faith in your process, and faith in yourself.
How do you have that faith? Where do you get it from? I mean,
You fake it, of course, like everything, like all creative people. You put a little swagger in your step and you go for it.
Ah, so it's the personality of writers like Hemingway. You have to have a lot of confidence, maybe more confidence than what you should have, maybe.
I don't compare myself to him.
No, I'm not saying that.
As a person, as a human, or as a writer, but there are a lot of things that you can put in place to make sure that scaffolding doesn't feel like you're dancing on air.
Okay.
And that that's what I teach. Like, that's what Book in a Year is. It's about combining your mindset and your mechanical skills, because you need both. And the thing is, like, my MFA or my experience writing my first book, none of it talked to me about mindset. Nobody ever said anything about writing is math. If you sit down once a week and write 500 words, you will finish a 75,000 word draft in 3 years. 3 years is not that long to write a book. If you sit down twice and still only 500 words each time, a year and a half. If you sit down once and write 1,000 words, a year and a half. So, nobody ever said that to me. I had to figure that out on my own, and maybe another person would have figured it out without so much pain.
Yeah.
but I went through the pain and I finally figured it out.
Right. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think what we'll do is we're going to go through one more book. Sydney, if you want to roll through. And we don't have to read that one, Olivia.
Okay.
So this is very different than the other novels.
Mm-hmm.
Can you summarize Girlfriending?
Girlfriending.
What is that all about?
It's about a woman who goes on 10 dates to get over a broken heart. Okay, so I had a broken heart.
Okay.
Because, the writer's life tends to be full of drama.
Yeah, that's true.
It is true. And that's how I like it. And I had this, so just beware that Taylor Swift is about to be invoked. I had this 9-week relationship at age 47 years old, which is like 9 times as old as anybody in this room. And I was completely unseated by it. If you have a chance to be completely emotionally unseated in your 40s, take it. Because I learned so much about myself and how unprepared I was to get horribly dumped at age 47 after 9 weeks. But then Taylor Swift came out with an entire 34-track album about a 2-week relationship. And I was like, that's right. That is right. If Taylor Swift can do it, I can do it. So Girlfriending is autofiction, which is not something I'd ever done before, which is where you use kind of some of the main plot points of reality and you make up everything else. So many people who have read it have said, well, why didn't you just make it a memoir? And I'm like, because those people don't exist. I can't pretend they exist. That would be unethical. So I did go on 10 dates to get over a broken heart. And Girlfriending is basically what happened during those dates.
Love that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it was fun to write.
It was fun to write. There was a lot of crying. But it gave me a purpose. And again, not my idea. My best friend, Curtis Ittenfeld, who is like a multi-bestseller, gives me my best ideas. And she and I were talking once again about me being dumped and, and she was like, you really just need to write about this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to write a short story. That short story was called The Goddess of Illicit Choices, and it won second place in a short story thing. And once it did that, I was like, maybe, so it was going to be published, and it was, it was still like a year away from being published, but I was like, maybe there is something here. Maybe, she's right. I should write this book. So I went ahead from that short story. I built the rest of the book.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, Sydney, one more time. So I think I'm going to run through this slide because of time. But Sydney, I'm going to ask you to go 1, 2, there, stop. So we're at college. Briefly, you didn't write in high school. You weren't really thinking about being a novelist when you were in high school, were you?
No, I was one of those people who adults were always like saying to me, you should be a writer. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I didn't see myself in any of the books that I was reading. I love to read, but I didn't see myself writing any of them. I didn't understand what they were saying. I thought they were saying like, get a journalism degree or a marketing degree or something like that. So I went to college with no plan to do any creative writing, and there was no creative writing at my college.
Columbia. Yeah, New York.
There is now. There is a minor in creative writing there. There are some great people working there, but there wasn't then. And after I realized that I thought that this thing was going to like magically happen for me, and it never did. And I was an editor, and I was an editor in New York, and I had a live-in relationship and a future in New York. And one day I was called into the managing editor's office, and he offered me his job. He was moving up, and I was going to move into his job. And I panicked. I had like this existential panic, and I realized that it was because I wasn't going to be what I thought I was going to be, what everybody had always told me I was going to be. I was going to be an editor, and editing's great. I love editing, but that's not what I wanted to be. So I quit my job, and I applied to graduate school, and I left New York, and I've never gone back.
Okay.
And I left that person too.
Next slide, please, Sydney. And that is becoming a novelist. All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. I want to get a little Q&A with the crowd here. How does one become a novelist? I mean, what is the process? I mean, we talked about writing, how you write these books, but how do you get it to an audience? How do you get it published? How does that happen?
Well, a lot of people are going to say like the sky is falling in publishing land, but I think we live in the best time ever to write fiction. People do read, but we are no longer bound to the big 5 publishers like we used to be. So these 2 were published by HarperCollins. You've heard of HarperCollins, big fancy. They flew me to New York. I got to meet with the marketing teams, blah, blah, blah. They get you reviewed in the most big places. They send you on a modest tour, that kind of thing. So that's what, in my generation, that's what we thought of as publishing. Well, I had to sell, I think there were like 16,000 of my hardcovers were sold in the first 6 months that it was out. I have no idea how many by now because I'm still making money from this. But what I'm trying to say is that I had to sell so many of this book to make what I made versus if I had published it myself, if I had grown an audience, if I had gone with a smaller publisher that took a smaller cut. I mean, I made $1 on a hardcover and I make like 10 cents on the audiobook. Right? So what I think now is like, you have so many options for how you want to publish. The only option you don't have is making something that isn't great, because we now will weed you out ourselves. We don't even need the publishing companies to do that anymore. So you make something great, and then you decide how to get it into the hands of your audience. And you would only need, 1,000 people to read it to make the same amount, right? Because the publisher is taking such a big, so yeah, I mean, it's a great time to become a novelist, as far as I'm concerned. And especially because people are so excited about genre right now. I mean, we're living in this like constantly shift. Is it romantasy that's hot? Is it YA that's hot? Is it new adult that's hot? Yeah. I love that stuff. And I mostly just read boring literary fiction, but I love the fact that the people are now determining what we want. And what we want is heavy plotting, excellent characterization, excellent, and perfect sentences. And we used to want perfect sentences. And we didn't really care that much about the rest. And now we care about all of it. And I think it's a great time to become a novelist.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sydney, one more slide. And can you guide, before we get into Q&A, we're coming almost to the end here. Can you guide the audience on these 3 parts for this writing activity?
Yeah. So I would love it if you were thinking, so a novel is big, but it's also, as David mentioned earlier, it's the same as a screenplay in that, or a play in that it's 3 parts generally. You're going to generally have 60 scenes. Novels in our blood, even unconventional novels have this sort of same rise fall of their action. So when you're thinking about a novel, you're really just thinking of a big story. The novel eats everything. A big story that can really involve so much of your interiority, your character's interiority, so much action. So tell me what point of view you want. And that's, point of view is your most important decision. It's the lens through your story. It's the thing that keeps your reader reading. It's not plot, it's point of view, because I could be reading the most active plot, but if it's over here and then I'm just watching a TV or something. And we're not watching TV when we're reading, we're immersed. So you're wearing the skin of your point of view. What skin do you want to wear? What kind of clock do you want? Again, like saying something like 10 dates, or I have a student who just wrote a book that's 69 chapters, but takes place over 11 days. That's a great clock, really good clock. 3 days is a great clock. My second book is 1 summer. And then tense. Are you going to try for present tense, or are you going to do past tense? And if you do past tense, you have 2 options. You can have straight past, which really reads just like present in the reader's experience, or you can have like a retrospective. So in Stiltsville, there's a difference between who is writing the story and who experienced the story. It's a 30-year difference. And the difference becomes wisdom that you include in your narration. So are you going to do that? Or are you just going to write it as if it's happening now or yesterday?
Thank you. Yeah. So if you're interested, you have those note cards. You can start writing, put things down, or bring it with you and do it after this event. So I think we'll open it up for the audience Q&A for about 10 minutes. Including if you have any questions. Todd, do you have a microphone for the audience? Okay.
Can I say one more thing before we get this first question, which I'm really excited about? And that is that just in terms of like becoming a novelist, the best, everybody's got their favorite novelist quote, but my favorite is from E.L. Doctorow, whose fiction I have never read. Writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make it the whole way that way. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying make some decisions, know where you're going. You don't have to know the whole thing. Sorry. Thanks.
Great. Question. You have the microphone for anyone who has a question. Does anyone have a question?
Did you have one?
Okay, right there.
Hi, can you tell us about starting the business that you have supporting writers in the Madison area? Mm-hmm. How did that work? And I know you thought of it because you'd seen models of it elsewhere, but tell us the backstory about how that works.
It's funny because, we had never had anything like that here. And this was back when we didn't have a J. Crew, I know we don't have a J. Crew anymore anyway, but Madison was not where it is today. And I said, we're going to do this and we're going to have MFA level instruction and we're going to take everybody seriously, no matter how much experience they have. And that works actually, because you have a small group of people, you can meet each person where they are, and each person has something to offer. When you bring raw original material to the table, you are giving such a gift to the people who are reading it, because they can see what needs to improve so much better than they can in their own. So what you're doing is basically offering yourself, not taking, you're offering. So I knew that would work. I knew it from my own MFA experiences. I knew it from my friends who had done this elsewhere. And so I told my friend, Michelle, I said, we're going to do this. She was like, I don't think that's going to work here. I said, it is. We started with our flagship course. It's called Book in a Year. I'm now teaching 2 sections of Book in a Year. This is my 11th year doing it. I have 2 more that are filled for next year. We started with it was $1,000, and I sat down with a journalist from one of the local papers, and she said, I'll never forget, she's like, who is going to pay $1,000 to take a class? The world has changed a lot. I now charge $2,500. It's a huge amount of work. It is not a big moneymaker for me, but it is the best way to learn how to write a novel is to have a lot of other people telling you what you're doing wrong. So I have learned so much. They have learned so much. And then we teach short story writing. We teach essay writing. We have added and added and added. Sometimes we've added too much and then we don't fill our classes. So we pull back. You know, there's still only so many people who want to take private writing instruction. We have scholarships. We try to get as many writers of color and non-binary and trans writers as we can to our tables. For a while there, we used to jokingly call it the middle-aged white women's Madison Writer Studio, but that's not true anymore. That's kind of where we started and not where we are now. And I love it. I think I'm going to keep doing it until I kick it.
Do I give the name of the nonprofit right now?
It's not a nonprofit.
No, I'm sorry.
It's a Madison Writer Studio, and it's like just in terms of writer's life, it's about 50% of my income comes from the Madison Writer Studio. And then we also have a brand new async course called Write Your Novel. And that's at iwillwritemynovel.com.
And you also put on the summer retreat that I attended, correct?
Yes. So there used to be a lot more writing instruction in Madison. Of course, there's always been the great program here, which again, I used to teach at, so I know it's great. And then there's the UW where I also used to teach, and that's a good program too. But there also used to be Right by the Lake and Weekend with Your Novel, which were, you could just join these. You didn't have to be a student. But those were closed down as part of like larger budget cuts out of UW, the UW extension. And so we took it over. So we have a slightly different plan. We don't do any lectures. We don't do any large group anything. It's all about small groups, one-on-one or 1-on-6 or 7 instruction for us. So we changed the format, but we kept the event. So we have that every June or July.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody have a question? We have a microphone over here. Okay, you want to pass it over to Raven?
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
Wait, is this ringing? Okay. Hello. I'm Raven. I was hoping to. So I have I wanted to ask you sort of like writing process. I have an ongoing debate with a friend of mine. He prefers like sort of the guarding method of where you just like outline very vaguely and you let the story develop as you write it. And I prefer the opposite where I outline everything very meticulously and then write bits of it here and there until it like fills in. And I was wondering like what kind of method you preferred for how you write your novels.
Have you finished your novel, Raven?
No.
Why?
Because I am still meticulously planning it.
Okay. Has he?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he also started before, like, a year before me, so he had advantage.
He had it. Okay. So I'm going to be a little harsh. Writing an outline is not writing. Research is not writing. Planning is not writing. Thinking is not writing. So I have a lot of people who come to my table and say, I have the entire story written in my head. And I say, how many words do you have written on paper? And they say 0. So outlining is awesome. I love it. It feels good. It feels productive. It's not scary. The blank page is scary. So what I ask people to do process-wise is to look at their week and say, okay, I'm going to spend, let's say you have 4 sessions. That would be a lot in a week, in a busy week. Okay. Let's say you have 4 writing sessions. I'm going to ask you to use 3 of them with the blank page and 1 of them continuing to work on your outline. So meaning you get 1 to 4 or 1 to 3 ratio of organizing and planning versus writing. And I think that can be really great because while you're organizing and planning, you might have an idea to get unstuck in the blank page. But what's really important is that you separate those tasks. So it's the same thing as asking yourself to separate your writer from your inner editor, right? So we never want both of those people in the room at the same time, ever. They are super, super different, super important parts of our creative lives, but they're different, right? And one coming into the other is why it's why creative work doesn't get made. That's it. That's all you need to know about why creative work doesn't get made, is because the editor walks into the room before it's time. So I ask my students to please dedicate time to write in a greater proportion that they dedicate time to revise, edit, outline, anything like that. Personally, I don't outline because it kills something for me. And the times that I've done it, I've never finished the work. That said, I do what I call a reverse outline. So after I've written the book, I'm going to look at exactly what's on the page. I am super, super focused. This is when my writer goes away and my editor comes in. I'm super, super focused on what have I created? Where are the major plot beats? Where does the momentum pause? Where does it intensify? All of that stuff. I'm looking at everything that needs to be in a finished novel in terms of structure. And I'm assigning and I'm changing according to what's not there already. So it's not that I never plan. It's just that I don't do it until I've written the book. I know many very successful writers who write outlines.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Raven. Any other questions from, could be somebody from this side? Raise your hand.
I love it.
Would you say that the things you've talked about today in the writing process and the creative process not only apply to novel writing, but other forms of creativity? So not just novel writing, but songwriting or art
Painting.
or any other kind of creative arts like that?
Yeah, I would. I in my mind, I distinguish between long form creative projects and short form creative projects. And I would say that, most creative projects are kind of long, like a novel is. So I always say that there are three myths about long form creative projects that we all kind of have in our bones that we need to purge ourselves of. One is that you don't have enough discipline or willpower. Not a big fan of discipline and willpower. I've never had it. I never will. What I'm a really big fan of is like letting those muscles work on short-term tasks and finding joy and meaning in returning to the page over and over again. And that's what gets me writing and keeps me writing. I wrote these down just in case they came up. The other one is that there's not enough time. So like I said earlier, you can actually finish a long form creative project in 500 words a week, within 3 years. And then the last one is the idea that you have to have your whole painting or your whole memoir or anything in your head when you start. And that's just not true either. And I think for any long form creative project, if you keep those things in mind, and if you keep that faith and swagger, you just keep moving, you keep moving. As long as you're making progress, you will find that you can keep going. It's when we stop making progress, when those walls just rise up and we get overwhelmed. But any progress is progress. Slow progress is progress.
Well, thank you very much, Susanna.
Yeah, this has been fun.
For today and for your inspiration and your tips on writing. So I really appreciate it. Olivia, I threw you in here at the last moment. And by the way, this was an extra credit for Olivia. She had no idea she was going to be on stage. And I really appreciate it. You did a great job.
Yeah, you did.
Better.
You did great.
Okay, so I'd like to conclude by saying thanks to the audience who came here, and Writer's Life Lecture Series will happen again down the road. We're going to have political journalism. We're going to have horror writing, horror novels, and also I think we're going to get into writing for television next semester. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Take care, everybody.